Hello, welcome back to Enjoying the Word. We're thinking about the Bible study process, especially the learning phase, learning what a passage means. We're going to do kind of a part B to the last video where we're thinking again about the learning phase and specifically the content aspect of looking at what's in the passage, and we're looking still at the details. Next time we'll probably get to the flow of thought, which is another aspect to consider. But really we're looking at the details, we're trying to make sense of them. Last time we looked at this top first 3 verses and kind of dug into those a little bit. Now we come to this middle section from 4 down to, what would it be, about verse 8 really, that holds together. And it's Peter writing to these Christians that are in tough circumstances. He wants them to know who they are, and he's going to tie them together here with their identity connected to Christ. So we've got to identify who the him is. That's Jesus. Okay, so as you come to him, a living stone, rejected, sorry, I didn't mean to cross that out, a living stone, rejected by men, but in the sight of God, chosen and precious. So that description of Jesus is going to flow into what he's saying about them. You yourselves are like living stones. Implication, probably the same stuff that's already been said. Just like Jesus is rejected but chosen and precious in God's eyes, so you're experiencing rejection but you're chosen and precious in God's eyes. Just like Jesus, a living stone. And that's an interesting phrase. What does he mean by that? He's going to take a load of a sequence of 3 or 4 Bible passages that reference stone, referring to Jesus. But I don't know, Peter's so captivated by the resurrection of Christ. Jesus is not some kind of dead stone. He's alive, right? So we've got a living stone, and we are like living stones. So he's kind of using that analogy for us to be built up as a spiritual house. What would that mean? Well, God building a house always refers to a temple. It seems to be temple language. Certainly that's reinforced here by the idea of a holy priesthood and offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. So what's he describing? He's describing Christ's role as somehow connected to the temple. What's the role of the temple? A little bit of background awareness. The temple is that point of connection between God and man, right? And so the nation could come, the peoples of the world could come really to the temple to come before God, and God's presence was there in a special way. It was a unique blessing that Israel had. And here Peter's using that language for Jesus. Jesus is living stone, rejected but chosen precious, and you too, rejected, chosen, precious, are being built up as a temple, holy priesthood, offering sacrifices acceptable to God. You're right there in the midst of the mission of Christ to bring together God and humanity. You're part of the humanity that's being brought close. And so there's a richness to this imagery here, and you could kind of do well to dig into the significance of each of these phrases, each of these words. What does it mean? What is the truth that's being conveyed here? And then he starts to establish what he's saying with some scriptural references here. So the Isaiah 28:16 one, behold, I am laying in Zion a stone, a cornerstone, chosen and precious. Whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. So there's Jesus, and then there's those who respond to him. That's the kind of key down at the bottom there. Whoever believes in him will not be put to shame. These people were suffering. These people were having a tough time. We know that from the historic background and the written context. He writes so much about suffering in this letter, but he wants them to know that you'll never be put to shame if you belong to him. And so he's tying their identity to Jesus. So the honor is for you who believe. The honor of not being put to shame is for believers. Doesn't mean that it's true for everyone. Look at this. But for those who do not believe, what happens? Well, you've got this quote and this quote, right? So how do these quotes work? If you're really studying well, you'd want to go back and look at them in context. Psalm 118 verse 22, and then down here Isaiah 8 verse 14. and looking at them in their context originally back in the Old Testament would help to see how they're being used here. But what's he saying? Well, kind of two things. For those who do not believe in Jesus, Jesus still is the cornerstone. He was rejected, but that doesn't mean it's not true. You can reject him as much as you want. He's still the key one. He's still the focal point of God's plan. Okay, he has become the key piece of this project that God is working out. So their rejection doesn't change Jesus, but it kind of changes what he is to them, right? Because he is therefore a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense. If they don't honor him, then they're going to trip up over him, and he's going to become their problem, if you like. They stumble because they disobey the word, as they were destined to do. So God's great plan is being worked out, and Jesus is the focal point of it. And if your response to him is to believe, then you have no shame ahead of you. You have honor ahead of you. But if you do not believe, it doesn't change who Jesus is. He's still the focal point of all of God's plans, but he becomes to you a rock of offense, a cause of stumbling. You're going to trip up over Jesus into judgment. That's kind of what's being said here. So there's a richness in this passage, isn't there? A richness in the details, seeing the quotes, seeing how they're working together and making sense of what he's saying. And so then we've got this blitz at the end. We won't go through it in detail, but you do well to study it. This is rich stuff. One thing I will point out, he is never in this passage calling them Israel. He's using Israel as the example. And so just like Israel was a chosen race and was supposed to be a royal priesthood, Exodus 19, was supposed to be a holy nation, a people for God's possession, the same thing that was true for them is now true for the church. He doesn't say the church is Israel. He doesn't conflate them or combine them or anything like that. But he's using a rich Old Testament terminology to underline their privileged position, their wondrous identity because of God's goodness to them. And so, again, we could go into Hosea 2 to kind of get a sense of verse 10 and the richness there. We will save ourselves some time, but I would encourage you to jump in and study each word, each term, each detail, and also the passages that are feeding in order to make sense of the passage in front of you. Hope you're enjoying the word. We'll come back next time to think about the flow that you get within a passage. We've looked at details. Next time we'll look at flow.